Children should be seen and not heard. They say they'll understand when you're older. You're just a kid. But a kid swam for 3 hours on the open seat.
So, Marcus, welcome in for our studio. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And so this evening, of course, we're checking in and we're talking today about child's identity and a child's right to an identity. And in the beginning, let's start off, Marcus. When we talk about identity, can you define it for us? What really is identity all about?
Well, I think it's important for us to one understand that an identity is we try to understand identity. We start by asking the question, who am I, right? It's how we perceive our various roles in society in relations to others, right? It's funny that society is always in comparison to something else or someone else, and most times it's those things that have more value, more privilege, and more respectability in society, right? Whether it's through social positioning, culture, ethnicity, interest, achievements or beliefs, children derive a sense of pride, self-worth, and consistency from their social identity. So really and truly, identity is, what we know to be who we are, and we learn about who we are, and we develop who we are from multiple social factors around us.
Definitely. And we're so happy to have you here, even as we're discussing and we're giving observance to World Children's Day,
Yeah.
because we're saying that World Children's Day is really UNICEF's annual day of action for children by children. And we know that with the COVID-19 happening, it has resulted in a lot of child rights crisis. And even among the pandemic, if we don't address some of these challenges expressed by children and families at large, of course, we know that these challenges would spread for the generations to come if not dealt with. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Marcus, is why do you believe it is important for children to have an established sense of identity? And of course, the part B to that would be, especially within these COVID recovery days, why it's of added importance for parents to facilitate and build a child's sense of identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Two loaded questions. I think I want to start off by first trying to kind of historicize or center this idea of identity in historicism.
Yes.
Why the UN really felt like this was important is because in the I think it was the early 1950s, when Argentina had prisoners of war, and they had children. The children were taken from these prisoners and sent off to multiple places. And they lost their sense of who they are, their connection to their culture, to their family name. And I think the UN, in its spirit, was trying to allow for us to understand that we cannot rob children and people a sense of who they are, where they come from. And more so, we have to understand that identity is socially constructed, meaning that it is fluid and it could change. Right? And we see it day to day, right? Children like one particular sport, or they identify as wanting to be a doctor in the future. And that shifts. So we understand that in contemporary times, we see that children have stateless identities. Mexican children, when they are born in the United States, and their parents are not citizens, and the parents get deported, or the children themselves can't access nationality or citizenship because of who their parents are. Children and people tend to lose their identity, and in order to abide and to fit in, one has to acquire the identity of the state or the host country that they want to function in. And given the fragile states, the fragility of the economy in places like Venezuela, Colombia, and etc., and we see this forced migration existing, and children are coming, right? UNICEF identified almost 4,000 children coming in the last 2 years to Trinidad and Tobago. And in order to function, to enable to keep up and to become participatory citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, they may have to lose particular identity traits, right? And I think this is what UNICEF is trying to allow for us, that you should not have to lose your identity to belong.
Yes.
I think that is vital for us to understand. And I think as we go along, we will start to see how these maintaining identity and celebrating identity and ensuring that no one gets to lose their identity and no identity is forced on anyone, we see how it is multi-sectoral approach from this conversation on a one-on-one with me and you, right? The roles of these parents moving forward, and at a larger scale and on a policy level and a constitutional level, we see the importance of the CRC calling on states and calling on government to ensure that their policies don't infringe on children's identities.
Yes, and even as we consider parents, even within their own individual homes, even as they look on at this conversation today, what can you share with even local parents, whether here in Trinidad and Tobago or the wider Caribbean, as they focus on supporting their children towards holistic development? What can you share with them to help them understand why it's important for them within their individual homes to take a focus on developing and establishing their children in their identity?
Right. I think that again, let's be careful about having fixed identities, because that's where the problem comes from. We're saying that one particular kind of identity is more valuable and more important. And in this case, it would be the parent's idea of what a righteous identity is versus allowing children to explore and come to a kind of a conclusion, right? Or some sort of comfortableness with what their identity may look like. So we have to be very careful that we don't want parents to infringe an identity or infringe a right and wrong identity, but we want parents to support and explore multiple ways that identity could be formed. Now, I want to raise that by bringing up a scenario, right? I want us to think through identity through a scenario, right? We have a 12-year-old Venezuelan girl living in Trinidad and Tobago for 2 years. She's attempting to register for a convent to attend school. Her father is Trinidadian Hindu, her mother is Roman Catholic and Venezuelan, and her parents are not married. Let me ask you a question. What aspects of her identity do you think she will keep private in order to be accepted into the school and at large the wider society?
And I think even as we consider that question, Marcus, it
Mm-hmm.
highlights the importance of this question, because then we could start to look at the role of the parents in
Mm-hmm.
really focusing on that child and exploring the development of the child. So it's not just about the overarching or national issues that we now conform and say you must and you must not, but we could explore the instinct and the natural inclinations of the child in order to make sure he or she is developing well. And even as we talk about that, I want to ask you, Marcus,
Mm-hmm.
when we think about the role of parents in helping children find their identity, what would you describe or explain as the role of parents in this process?
Well, it's vital. The home is the first place of socialization. It's the first place of approval. It's the first place of understanding, belonging. Your role is to let children know that the choices that they make once they're not harming themselves or other people um, are acceptable, and it needs to be encouraged, and it needs to be explored with parents and not dictated or done in a very authoritative kind of way. Parents' role is to really help children find that level of comfort within themselves, right? Parents should protect the right to an individualized identity, right? By seeking the child's wishes and feelings and concerns. I think we really have to consider parenting as really a supportive role as it comes to identities, and really listening and reflecting on our children's wishes and feelings, you know, and that's vital. And, and that goes in multiple ways, from assuming that boys only want to play sports and that girls don't. you know we put these gendered identities onto children. We may assume other things like even religion. We have this 12-year-old Venezuelan girl who mother is Roman Catholic, father is Hindu, and is applying to a Catholic school, and she hasn't and we could assume that, based on the scenario and really talk through it, that she may not have the opportunity of choosing a religion, because maybe in order to fit into this convent she has to subscribe to has to subscribe to being Roman Catholic. So we have to be very careful as adults and as parents what we force our children into, rather than supporting them into coming to a conclusion. And we will use a scenario as we go along to really think through what we're doing as parents and adults.
Yes, thank you. And for those who are now tuning in, just to remind us, with us is Marcus Kisoon, and he's a member of the Women's Movement since 2008. He's also a research officer for the Break the Silence and the Child Sexual Abuse Institute of Gender and Developmental Studies at the University of the West Indies. And his areas of work are Indianness, masculinities, child sexual abuse, HIV, and sex work. And even as we continue, Marcus, I want to talk about red flags and green flags with you. Because, of course, as a parenting show, it's always great when our guests are able to always come on and give these very practical examples of how parents can take things away. And so I want to start with red flags. If you were to identify maybe two or three things a parent should look for that is a red flag or a no because it says you are infringing on your child's right to identity, what are those things or experiences that would be had that would be the red flag?
As someone who is around gender and gender scholarships, I really want to talk about our Caribbean identity that was very much imposed by colonizers, and we live in a post-colonial state. Let's, for example, talk about hair and hair identity and hair politics. To this day, African hair has been shamed in systems of the workplace, almost legislative as well. And culturally, we shame African hair every day. Hence the reason why young girls want to texturize, want to flat iron. And we hear these narratives from our very own family, nappy hair, late for school hair. And those are the ways that we infringe on children's ability to identify with Africanness if they so choose to desire. There's a difference between children and people wanting to choose an identity of flat hair and texturized hair versus social factors and ideologies that say, listen, that's bad hair, you can't get a good walk with that kind of hair. So we really have, and that is a red flag for me because that has been brought into the 21st century from our grandparents, being afraid of African hair, Indian hair with coconut oil, and these kinds of things. So you start to see, and we could talk about identity from colorism. We know light skin Indian is more favorable in Indian communities versus dark skin. We know the red woman is glorified and sexualized versus the black woman. So we start to see these red flags around and complicating our identity and creating confusion in our children's lives. I mean, our children are exposed to very global north ideas of skin, language, and you ask children where you want to live, what country you prefer to live in, and they'll tell you something global north, right? They start speaking with accents because our dialect is shamed and not celebrated. So those ideas of identity, we really have to be careful. Are we celebrating our authenticity of who we are as Caribbean people? Because I have some Indians who think that they are more Indian in terms of from India versus Indo-Caribbean. You know what I mean? So we have to, and again, that's a choice, right? But it shouldn't be something that is forced on people because we're saying that this culture and this identity has more respect versus the one that you may want to choose. It's the same thing with sexuality, right? We celebrate heterosexuality. All the movies, everything is about straight people, man and woman coming together. If people so choose to have an alternative sexuality that isn't fitting to the norm, we shame them, we embarrass them. We have laws and policies that denies them that sexual identity. So we start to see how all of these things come right down to a few fundamental values, which is the value for difference. If we don't know how to value difference, then identities become confused and we have a hierarchy and the sense of belonging and inclusion. If we don't know how to make ourselves included and feel belong, we wouldn't know how to make other people because we'll start judging them on the same criteria that we hold ourselves to. And our identity becomes nothing but a rat race to meet something that we are probably not comfortable with in the first place.
Right, thank you. And so now let's talk about green flags. And we want to look at what are those approaches that parents should be mindful to take within the home, because through this conversation, they now understand that when I take this approach, I empower my child to be his or her best self, and I support my child's rights and identity. What green flags can you mention that parents should be mindful to look for and or to do in the home?
Well, one, not shaming any kind of identity is definitely the first one. You're not going to give nicknames and ridicule hair types or skin color. That's basic. That's the fundamentals of belonging. That is how you make children feel belong. Yes, you may be darker than your sisters and your brothers, but it should not be a reason for making anyone feel bad. It could be highlighted that you may have light skin, but I don't see the importance of it. But unfortunately, we live in a society where these what we call the master statuses, race, class, ethnicity, skin color, all of these things are the things that help us reach to the top. And it's unfortunate. So it's really about ensuring that we don't use ridiculing language to describe things. Well, you're well put on weight, girl, you go get a man to take care of you with that kind of weight. You understand? So we have
Yes.
to be very, very careful in the ways in which we celebrate and the way in which we encourage. Another way to show belonging is to throw yourself into the particular identity, um, and listen and reflect on what a child is saying. Children come to you with different types of music and dress. Ask yourselves, why this music? Listen to it, have conversation, and it really borders into a good kind of parenting as well. I'm not saying that you have to drop your laws in your household, right? Because some people might say, well, I don't like particular kind of music in my house. That's different. That kind of order and discipline is different. But if you really want children to understand the identities in which they choose, or the process of choosing an identity, right, which is also fluid, you really have to engage and reflect the type of music, the type of courses and school. I grew up I mean, gender studies is a very relatively new thing for me as an Indo-Caribbean male to bring gender studies into my house. It required my parents to ask, what is this about? Why are you interested in this? How could I get involved? Those are the things that you ask your children. We see how that grows, one, the bond between child and parent, and we see how children feel a lot, how their self-esteem raises, their self-worth raises, and children feel comfortable to go to parents when their identity becomes confusing.
Yes, yes, definitely. So, Marcus, even as we bring the curtains down on this discussion, tell me, what final thoughts do you want to leave with parents that they should really take away and model over as they consider the right of a child to an identity?
Um, One, I have to definitely say that this process of identity is cyclical. If you don't support your child's identity or the ability to choose and to healthily make decisions about their identity, they go out into society and they continue that process. If a child knows that her black hair and her black skin is wrong, she is going to find a problem with the migrant children that are coming here who speak different languages, who dance differently, who eat different foods. We will continue this process if we do not start allowing children to start to feel belonged, right? Have a sense of belonging, to understand inclusion, where you could live in a community with multiple things and it could all be okay. Ras could live alongside short hair, could live alongside long flowing hair. I think we have to understand that we need to teach our children inclusion, and that becomes the foundation in how all identities become secure, becomes comfortable, and that people could just value each other and their differences.
Thank you so much, Marcus. We appreciate you taking time to come and join in.
You're
And even
welcome.
as I always say to our mummies, daddies, aunties, and uncles, we thank you for joining in as well, whether you tuned in live or you're going to be looking at this on the replay. We appreciate you taking time to look at the video. But beyond that, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, because this was great content that Marcus has shared with us this evening as we consider children and identity and building for holistic child. So, on behalf of the Caribbean Parenting Team, my name is Alina, and I am so happy to have been with you guys today, sharing information about Universal, or as it is now called, World Children's Day. We say Happy Children's Day to all, and until the next time, have a great one.